Land in Wyoming has been the source of conflict since before the beginning of history. Prior to European settlement, the indigenous people of the area fought for supremacy of the land. Crow against Shoshone, Cheyenne and Lakota against the Crow. By the early 1800s, the indigenous tribes fought against the encroachment of mountain men. After the 1850s, the Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Lakota fought any travelers passing through. Settlers to California or Oregon, miners, telegraph crews, railroad workers, and the Army sent to protect them. By the late 1870s, the indigenous tribes had been pacified or removed, but there was no peace. Cattle barons went to war against small ranchers and homesteaders. When the cattlemen were not fighting each other, they were fighting the sheepmen. This is where the story of Willie Nickell begins. Willie was born in 1887 on the family homestead in the Iron Mountain area of Laramie County, Wyoming, about 40 miles northwest of Cheyenne. Kel Nichols, Willie's father, had homesteaded the area in 1885. At this time, Wyoming land and politics were controlled by the large cattle companies. The cattle barons resented the small ranchers who homesteaded on federal land they considered theirs. Just 2 years after Willie was born, the Johnson County War occurred between cattle barons and local ranchers. Kells Nichols was a cantankerous man. One neighbor, John Coble, a large cattle rancher in the area, was attacked with a knife. Another neighbor, Jim Miller, was threatened several times by Nickell. Because of the threats by Nickell, Miller always carried a shotgun. Miller also blamed Nickell for the death of his 14-year-old son, Frank. One afternoon, Frank and his sister were playing in a wagon when the shotgun was knocked down and discharged, killing Frank. Miller placed the blame for Frank's death solely on Nickell, and he swore that if the law did not avenge his son's death, he would. If all this bad blood and tragedy was not enough, Nickell decided to raise sheep on his ranch. Not a popular decision in the middle of cattle country. At this point, I have to mention the other major person associated with this story. That is Tom Horn. Tom Horn deserves a video of his own, and I will post one in the future. In the meantime, I will limit the discussion of Tom Horn to the case of Willie Nickell. Horn was a detective for the Wyoming Stock Growers Association. He was tasked with preventing rustling and identifying the rustlers for prosecution. In reality, he was a hired killer. He did the dirty work for the cattle barons. Horn was suspected in several murders in Wyoming. Unfortunately, no evidence could link him with any of these deaths. Within the Iron Mountain area, 2 men suspected of rustling had recently been murdered. Horn was suspected as the perpetrator of these murders, but again, no evidence could be found to link him with the death of these men. At the time, Horn was staying at the ranch of John Coble, supposedly working as a bronco rider. On the morning of July 18, 1901, Willie saddled his father's horse, and wearing his father's hat and coat, he rode out from the family home. Kells had ordered Willie to find a man in the area who was looking for work. Willie never came home. The next day, Nickell went looking for Willie. He found his son's body near the ranch gate, 3/4 of a mile from the house, lying on the road with 2 bullet wounds in his back. He had been turned face up and a rock placed under his head. The Laramie County Sheriff was notified. Investigation of the murder site showed that Willie had been shot while at the gate. He stumbled about 65 feet towards his house and collapsed face down on the road. While the murder of adult men was tragic, it could be tolerated, but not the killing of a young boy. Immediately, an investigation was launched for the murderer. At first, suspicion fell on Jim Miller, or one of his sons. Soon, however, the investigation began to focus on Tom Horn. Meanwhile, Willie was buried at the Lakeview Cemetery in Cheyenne. Deputy U.S. Marshal Joe LaForce was called in to investigate the murder. LaForce focused his investigation on Tom Horn. Horn was a heavy drinker and a braggart. One day, LaForce invited Horn up to his office to discuss the possibility of a job. Beforehand, he had arranged for a court stenographer and a deputy sheriff to be in the adjoining room. As LaForce discussed the bogus job with Horn, he kept plying Horn with whiskey and bolstering his ego. During the course of the conversation, the subject of Willie Nickell's murder came up, and Horn admitted that he shot Willie. The next day, Horn was arrested for the murder of Willie Nickell and placed in the Laramie County Jail. He was found guilty, and on November the 20th, 1903, he was hanged for the murder of the young teenager. Many believe that the murder of Willie Nickell was a case of mistaken identity. The real target of the killer was Willie's father, Kells. Remember, Willie was wearing his father's hat, coat, and riding his dad's horse. Did Tom Horn actually commit the murder? Opinions vary. There are numerous books and articles, each taking a different view. The subject of Tom's guilt or innocence is a topic for another video.